Howdy, all you delicious people. Again, we are here to ultimately talk about The Masked Singer, Season 4, Episode 7. So, going into this, very much so, we ultimately have a barrage of masked singers yet again, and ultimately, we have one go home. Very much, it's interesting how they really stretched this episode to abide to three mascotted peoples again. Now it's to the point of like dropping so many clues that for the most point still to me didn't actually like it didn't really land. Nothing landed on me. Like ultimately like I heard through the grapevine that ultimately like one of the clues was a person that, especially for the sun, had been performing recently. So that honestly could be anybody still, because ultimately it could have been anybody could have been performing, and then the new normal, let's just say, took them out of performing in a capacity of points and juncture and this and that. I had already mentioned numerous times that I like kind of the references of which I know Christina Aguilera's and Leanne Rhymes's stuff from. So when going into this, reasonably, uh, when going into this, it could be either one of these people, Christina Aguilera or Leanne Rhymes. In time, I'm going to tell you who had gone home tonight via mascotted name. So ultimately, do not feel that I'm going to spoil who had gone home right away. I'm going to leave that to the end so you guys can keep your guessing until the very end of this video. And ultimately, when I reveal, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I got it right, or I got it wrong, or ultimately, you can guess upon yourself who you think any number of these people are. By and large, some people had gotten these guesses completely correct the whole entire time, and they were just biting away to ultimately say, "Aha! I did the guess of good." Anyways, let's go into our neighborhood, and ultimately, yeah, the sun. Ultimately, yeah, like there was a clue about having a gold record, which ultimately I'm like, well, that still could be, like, it could be any number of people, I guess. Like that's not a huge clue. It's like I don't think it's like a huge, like daunting, like maybe it could be like a Carrie Underwood or something. I don't know. Like there's been a lot of people that have had a number of really popular hits legitimately could ultimately mean any number of things. There's so many connections probably with Disney that it could be like not actually Disney himself, Mickey Mouse himself. It could be like could realistically be like a Fox connection, which is now incorporated in Disney. Could be any number of things because that would be Carrie Underwood because Carrie Underwood is connected to NFL, which is connected to Disney, and by proxy, like Carrie Underwood is connected to Disney in a form of fashion of which tangents I know. But anyways, I think these are my two guesses so far. I got a free guess on this character, of course, because this character was not going home. Ultimately, the mascotted name who had gone home tonight was the Snow Owls. So ultimately, I said that there were probably three contestants, but if you counted Snow Owls as two, that would have to be four. But when looking at it, they sing duets. So here's the thing, though. Man, did they really stretch this episode out? But they brought out the knockout rounds, which I'm like, oh, okay, that's how they're gonna. Because again, they never have the singers sing twice. They never, like, except for the exclusion of knockout rounds, which kind of like the knockout rounds, like, I didn't feel like those were like combative songs, but like I think that there were still good songs. Like we ultimately had who we had kind of at the very end of these knockout rounds, who eventually I will get to. If ultimately you could assume that there's two other contestants, you could probably assume that it probably wasn't pop. It probably was. It probably wasn't the Sun, for this one. So moving on. The Snow Owls. So, my guesses. Normally, a lot of the times, McCarthy bizarrely had said the Huffs. What a bizarre guess! What a wild out of the gauntlet guess that Huff of gases. I had made that guess at some point. I'm like, you know what? I think it's like an older couple. Like ultimately, like people were like, yeah, maybe it is the Huffs. But I'm like, you know what? I just think it's an older couple. I do. I think it's like an older, like country couple. And I think everybody was like wanting to guess like either a younger couple or just a couple of people that they do. So ultimately, my guess is consistently, for the most point, at some I think one of these guesses like felt like a random like plug-in of just me like going, maybe it's this. Anyways, so Vince Gill and Amy Grant was a guess that like Robin Thicke consistently went with, and so recently I'm like, you know what? I'm always with the Thick. Like I'm always with that Robin. I'm always guessing with that man. So you know what? I'll throw in his guess. But yeah, I was like, you know what? There might be some fruition to that. So let's go with Robin's guess, the Thick guess. And then ultimately, I went with a while ago, Clint Black and Lisa Hartman Black. And ultimately, knowing not much about them except for some music here and there that I've heard from Clint Black, I was just like, you know what? Maybe there's some truth to this. Maybe there's some fascination with this kind of couple at the end of the day. I don't know, because it seemed there were some people like kind of coming up with these consensuses when I would kind of Google search things and stuff like that. So I was throwing it into the hat. I don't know, like to me especially, this did not feel like a younger couple. I didn't think like Donnie and Marie, as ultimately some people would have had assumed. So ultimately, these were my two guesses, and hoping for the best that I'm right at the end of this episode. If you already know who had gotten unmasked, then you'll probably know who I had gotten right and or wrong. So why? Justifiably, Popcorn. So Popcorn had went into the knockout battles, and ultimately the Snow Owls had lost. It's kind of hard to really not spoil what happened into the episode because when I go about things, it's severely hard to, by and large, figure the frickin' out how to like. What am I gonna wait to the very end of the episode and ultimately like let everybody know what happened? I don't know. It's severely hard, but by and large, so, Popcorn, I'm adjusting now. I don't know why we always guess, like, Tina Turner's and big Whamadyne Esh-like stars. By and large, I think right around this episode, and I think McCarthy went the same route. She went with Taylor Dane, which ultimately I think at some point I went with as well. Knowing full well, I think Taylor Dane does have a very much accent like Popcorn does have, and knowing full well that Taylor Dane does have that single "Tell It to My Heart," which ultimately she's like she is completely happy about that. I know because I saw the interview. Believe me, I saw it of her on Michael Rosenbaum's "Inside of You." And where ultimately she's like, you know what? Like, I'm completely happy with having that one hit. Like, basically, she's willing to wear that one song name on a hat or whatever. Just like, yeah, I still like that song, and it's a good song. And luckily for me, like, there's some people that in the music business absolutely have zero success. So I ultimately am like, you know what? Like, I hope it's Taylor Dane. You know what? Gosh darn it. Like, it sounds quite possibly close enough. And when looking at it, um, yeah, I like freaking Tell It to My Heart, so what? It's a good song. It's an interesting song. It's much different than a lot of stuff that's out there. I like older music. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not going to apologize for liking old music. Whatever old music means to anybody, because ultimately what is old to somebody is new to somebody right now. So at the end of the day, it would be interesting for Popcorn to ultimately be Taylor Dane, because she is a great star. She's a great singer. Um, yeah, it's like, yeah, she's very interesting. I like the interviews that she does. She's really nice. Moving on. So reasonably, now is the point where we ultimately would have told you that, yeah, Popcorn, Snow Owl, Knockouts. Ultimately, we have Popcorn who sang um, the Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Kevin Costner theme song. Um, Everything I do it for you. So ultimately, that was kind of like a very interesting, like, man, like with the Snow Owls, like, man, their song choice for like this episode especially was like really good. It was like really palpable. Is or really just like it gets at your heartstrings. And ultimately, like, I think a lot of people were just like frustrated that there was so few to really pick through. And I think the Snow Owls honestly just fell through the cracks. I actually loved the song choice that they had, because reasonably it was just kind of interesting to me. It was kind of like, it was just kind of like, you know what? Like, it was pretty freaking great. Do I remember the song? No. That's the stupid person that I am. But ultimately, yeah, I don't remember much of their songs, but man, were they good. They were actually good. Um, Everybody tonight was good. Like I don't think there was one that felt like that, oh yeah, like clearly this person should go home. It was kind of a toss up. Ultimately, people could have their consensuses differently. But I actually like a very like everybody's trying to get there kind of thing mentality, where it doesn't feel like there's one person that quickly gives up and is like, dude, I know I'm leaving, so I might as well just like out a good song and just fart out a good song and then just ultimately leave. No, it seemed like everybody in this episode was trying to bring it as best as they could, and luckily for them, like in the end, that's what a good person leaves. And then ultimately you have like other shows where it's like, oh man, if only like the Snow Owls would have been saved, because I think there's other people that I think like could have been like people that could have like kept these people on longer, that could have been eliminated, sadly enough. I don't want to say that there's some bad apples in this season, but ultimately for reasons I could say that like there's realistically like some point in times where it's like, oh man, like it's too bad they left. It's too bad. Uh, but anyways, let's get into spoilers. Let's go and bring out that double five to otherwise say that we're gonna spoil in a lot of ways who the Snow Owls were. So at the end of the day, let's go into who the Snow Owls were, and then we'll do a seasonal recap so far on whether I'm doing good or poorly, because we gotta go into it every single episode, because it happens, it happens. Sometimes you think that you're gonna just do well every episode, and sometimes you just fart out a bad decision. Guesses have been made, and Shades Heaven. Let's we're gonna unmask the Snow Owls. I'm stretching this out. I apologize. Right now. Ultimately, the Snow Owls were Clint Black and Lisa Hartman Black, Grammy-winning singer, Grammy-nominated actress, and singer. I think the real true consensus is like one, man, like Clint Black, whew, he was sweating. He was sweating under that hat. Like, man, God bless him, because man, I'm sure like those suits are probably so thick and probably just so like whoo man. But ultimately I love how Lisa Hartman was just saying like as soon as she saw the costumes, she immediately fell in love with them. And I'm like, bravo to her. I'm like, great. Like it's good. Like some people were just kind of probably shoved with some costumes and like, but luckily for them, like they really like enjoyed it. They had a lot of fun out of it. Like, man, Clint Black, man, every single time you would see him, he would have so much fun with the costume. Every single time I would just like see him do some like bird stuff and I'd just be laughing. Just because he was like, man, like having a lot of fun with this costume. And so ultimately both of them, like, bravo for the freaking good work that they were doing throughout this season so far to ultimately like definitely keep them in the running. But ultimately it was just like it was sad to ultimately just like kind of like pulling like figuring out like who exactly was going to go end up going home in this episode. Yeah, reasonably, yeah, Clint Black and Lisa Hartman Black. Ultimately, I guess you would ultimately say in a lot of ways, luckily for me, that this is going to count as another win under my belt, luckily enough. But ultimately, you know what? When looking at it, it's a win. But then again, it's just like, luckily, I am just able to, like, if I'm not able to 100% ultimately have a huge, like, backgammon knowledge of something, maybe I can just eventually figure something out. Eventually, I can kind of research and look into, like, because especially Clint, especially in this episode, he really, like, you could really, like, there's some times where it feels like the sounds are changed or muffled or something. Like, it's always kind of weird to me, like, or maybe that's just them trying to adjust, make them sound differently, which probably happens quite a lot. So if people can easily figure out who anyone is, that's when they slightly tweak something to make somebody sound different, or ultimately the artist does that to make themselves sound different, because ultimately some people could come up with a consensus fairly quickly. Um, but like Lisa and Clint, man, they were wonderful people. Like, man, I wish that's the heartbreaking part about like after these people get unmasked, after the Masked Singer, it's like right after that, you're basically like knowing like how nice they are and just how like genuinely really great people they are. So by and large, yeah. Sadly enough, they went home. But ultimately, like, good for them that they did this, that they wanted to do this, and that ultimately they fell in love with the costumes. And again, they had a lot of fun with it, which I thought was great. So, anyways, that's all I have to say about the blacks. Clint Black and Lisa Hartman Black. Anyways, let's go into a seasonal recapping. So ultimately, if you don't want to know what is going on so far, then by and large, you can go into very much going out of your way to go on Hulu and watch The Masked Singer at any point in time. Probably should have suggested that in the very beginning of this, because ultimately, more than likely, somebody may have not have seen this episode or whatever. But let's go into a seasonal recapping. So on last week's episode, if you guys did not know, Bob Saget had been ultimately revealed as the squiggly monster. Ultimately, I had gotten that bizarrely at the last ditch effort correct, but ultimately, you know what? These kind of wins and losses, like, you know what? It's just looking at it, like, there's some of them where, like, some of these guesses just felt like not ultimately deserved, but F it. Just a W's a W, I guess, but ultimately, yeah, it is what it is. So, we've ultimately, so far in this entire season, Buster Rhymes Dragon, uh, Brian Austin Green as the giraffe, very much Snow Owls were both Lisa and Clint Black. Mark Sanchez ultimately was the baby alien. Mickey Rourke was the gremlin. Uh, Bob Saget was the squiggly monster. And ultimately, Wendy Williams was the lips. Ultimately, it had to take me a second because ultimately I'm like, I don't remember everyone. Because my brain is a storm right now. So yeah, trying to process some things. So anyways, yeah, so far, I guess kind of popping down the line of a luckily winning season so far, luckily, but honestly, when looking at it, like some of these were like really easy to do, and then some of them were just like a real true stretch to ultimately. So like that's the real true bargaining of this season is to ultimately just throw everything to the kitchen sink and hope that it's correct. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm sure in a lot of ways there is still time to still lose and lose a lot. There's still a lot of consensuses that I probably have ultimately no clue of who a lot of these dudes and women are by and large. Maybe there's a goat in there. I don't know, but that's the joke I always go with. So, when looking at this, I hope that we are still near and dear steering our way to a winning season. So far, it's looking quasi within, with the exception of probably Group C. It still is looking pretty good so far. Because by and large, I think I have most of. I think I could probably say I have maybe Group A narrowed down because there's only two people. Group B, maybe there's some wild cards in there. There's some really still wild cards, and so ultimately it could go either way. Group C, that could be a really drastically awful cause going and pausing and thinking about it. Because I could be way off on the entire three people of Group C. So ultimately, those are probably the people that I'd probably need to figure out who they are eventually at some point near in the future. But yeah, Group B I think is probably much more shaping up more than Group C is. So hopefully, by the time that we grind our way to Group B, I'll definitely be able to lock down who the heck is the whatchamacallit and the seahorse. Ultimately, if you look at previous episodes, you'll know who I had picked through those. So ultimately, you'll let me know if those sound pretty good, or maybe there's a different pick after all of this. So, anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.